The Flathead National Forest on June 3, 2021, held a deep and unsettling quiet. It was the kind of stillness that made the air feel heavy, and even the rustling pines seemed to whisper a warning. For Arden Flynn, a 38-year-old off-duty firefighter, this silence was exactly what he had sought. He was an experienced hiker, and with his old, frayed map in hand, he followed an unofficial trail, drawn by a desire for solitude and peace. But as he ventured deeper, he realized the forest's silence held a secret, something far more profound than simple tranquility. At 2:47 p.m., the tranquil forest gave way to an impossible sight. A splash of yellow, almost entirely consumed by years of vegetation, appeared through the thick underbrush. Arden's first thought was that it was a discarded piece of machinery, but as he pushed past ferns that reached his waist, his heart seized. It was a school bus, or what remained of one. The roof had caved in under the weight of time and weather, and moss and ivy had crept over the metal, as if nature itself was trying to bury it. The once bright yellow paint was now a sickly, greenish yellow, and the tires had long since melted into the earth. The windows were gone, replaced by jagged, rusty holes that stared out like vacant eyes. The faint number 57 was barely visible on the side. Arden stood there, unable to move, his mind racing. He hadn't seen a road in over an hour. There were no tracks, no sign of a crash. The bus had simply been swallowed by the forest. He walked around it slowly. The back door, the emergency exit, hung crookedly on one hinge, creaking with a faint, ghostly sound. He could see rows of moldy, torn seats inside. A few had deep gashes, revealing the yellow foam beneath like ancient scars. Pulling out his phone, he found he had no service. Cautiously, he climbed inside. The air inside was thick and suffocating, a pungent mix of damp wood, old plastic, and something else, a heavy, unmistakable scent of decay. Mold bloomed across the ceiling like a dark, sinister galaxy. Vines snaked through the shattered window frames, reclaiming the space. At the front, both the steering wheel and the driver's seat were gone. Yet the personal belongings of the passengers remained: jackets, backpacks, a few notebooks, and a pale green graduation cap from 1999 with a tassel still attached. A shiver ran down Arden's spine. The silence inside was oppressive, making every footstep echo and every breath feel like an intrusion. He knew he shouldn't be there, not just because it was dangerous, but because this place had been left untouched for a reason. He stopped near the very back of the bus. Under a pile of clothing, he saw a bone. Not just any bone, but a human jawbone, its teeth still intact. He froze, a wave of cold dread washing over him. A soft noise cracked behind him, the snapping of a twig, a whisper of movement. He spun around but saw nothing. The only sound was the frantic pounding of his own heart. He stumbled out of the bus, fumbling for his radio, desperate to get a signal. 2 hours later, the isolated site was a flurry of activity. Police and forensic teams swarmed the area, and bright yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the verdant forest. The news broke that night, sending shockwaves through the local community. Human remains had been found in an abandoned bus, and a 22-year-old cold case had been reopened. For the families in Willow Creek, this wasn't news. It was a brutal reopening of a wound that had never truly healed. 27 students from Willow Creek High School had boarded that bus on June 5, 1999, for what was meant to be their graduation trip. They were never seen again. The town had never moved on. A bronze plaque with their names was at the school's entrance, and every June 5th, candles were lit and photos were placed, a silent ritual of grief. Some parents had left town, unable to bear the memories, while others remained, trapped by a sorrow that had turned into ritual. Now, with the bus found, the questions were louder than ever. Where had it been all this time? Why were only 17 skeletons recovered, not 27? And why did it feel like the forest itself had been keeping this terrible secret? At the police station in Kalispell, Sergeant Morgan Vance stared at the evidence board. Photos of the bus, headshots of the students, and pages from old case files were crisscrossed with red string. She picked up a worn 1999 yearbook. On the back cover, a message from a student named Liam Thorne was circled in red ink. "We survived high school. The forest got nothing on us." Morgan Vance sighed. After all this time, the forest had proven that it had everything on them. Across town, a doorbell rang. Ilara Chen, now in her 60s, held her breath as she opened the door to a police officer. She had heard the news hours ago, the word "remains" dropping from the radio and shattering her world all over again. In her daughter Rowan's room, nothing had changed. The bed was still made, trophies still dusted, and her graduation dress still hung in the closet, preserved in plastic. Ilara had always refused to hold a funeral, clinging to the belief that her daughter wasn't gone, just not back yet. Her belief would soon be tested. At the discovery site, forensic teams found something strange hidden under the driver's seat. A manila folder, water-damaged but mostly intact. Inside were disturbing, fevered charcoal sketches signed by a missing student, Sasha Kim. The drawings showed masked figures, trees dripping with blood, and a bus surrounded by faceless silhouettes. On the final page was a drawing of a single person standing apart from the others, with the chilling caption, "One will return." The air in the cheap motel room was heavy with silence, broken only by the low buzz of a struggling mini-fridge and the hypnotic flicker of a fluorescent light. Liam Thorne sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on his hands. They seemed foreign to him, the skin rough with calluses, the fingers twitching with a life of their own. 22 years had passed since he'd last seen Willow Creek, and the town now felt unnaturally bright and clean. In his lap lay an old, faded yearbook, warped from years spent hidden in a plastic bag beneath floorboards. On the back cover, his own handwriting was still visible. "We survived high school. The forest's got nothing on us." A bitter smile touched his lips as he ran his thumb over the words. He closed the book slowly, his hands trembling as he set it on the nightstand. In the drawer below, tucked away beneath a broken remote and a hotel Bible, lay a single envelope. He hadn't opened it, but he didn't need to. The handwriting was his father's, Arthur Finch. Liam hadn't seen his father in nearly a decade. Back in 1999, Liam was the ghost of the group. He wasn't shy, just observant with a knack for fading into the background. Teachers described him as focused and mature, a polite way of saying he kept to himself. He wasn't the class clown like Felix Vance or the academic star like Rowan Hayes, the senator's daughter. He wasn't the quiet artist like Sasha Kim, who saw the world in vibrant, intricate detail. Liam was the one who recorded everything. His handheld camcorder was a constant companion, a digital eye that documented the mundane chaos of Willow Creek High, cafeteria brawls, football games, even a squirrel stealing a student's sandwich. He believed the small moments were the ones that truly mattered. His mother died of breast cancer in 2008, a tragedy he never truly faced. He hadn't even made it to the funeral. By then he was too deep in hiding, too terrified that if he showed his face again they would find him. His father never forgave him. He still remembered their last phone call, his father's voice filled with a desperate plea. "You owe us answers, Liam. You left us in the dark." But Liam couldn't explain what he had seen. Not then. Not now. At 6:15 a.m., Sergeant Morgan Vance's firm practice knock broke the stillness. Liam answered the door, still in the worn jeans and frayed thermal shirt he'd been wearing the day before. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale. "They're still watching," he whispered. "I told you." Morgan's gaze was steady. "Mr. Thorne, Liam, may I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. Morgan entered slowly, taking in the room. There were no drugs, just the old yearbook, the unopened envelope, and a pair of muddy boots by the door. She sat across from him, her notepad ready, but she didn't open it. Liam looked out the window, his voice barely audible. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Morgan didn't answer. "Because I don't," he continued. "I believe in people. I believe people can do things so horrific, so far removed from what we consider human, that they become something else entirely." "We recovered 17 sets of remains from the bus," Morgan said finally, her voice level. "Yours was not among them." Liam didn't flinch. "Of course not. Can you tell me where you've been for the last 22 years? Liam blinked slowly, as if coming out of a trance. "I can try." He was back on the bus 2 decades ago. He had almost skipped the trip. He hated crowds, the noise, the chaos that felt like static in his brain. But Rowan had insisted. "You can't miss this. It's our last memory as kids." He went. The bus was alive with laughter and music. Mr. Thomas Harding, the history teacher, checked off names near the front, and Ms. Alois Greer, the chaperone, wore her familiar purple scarf. Liam slid into the back row beside Sasha Kim. She didn't look up from her sketchbook, but he saw her drawing, flames and trees with faces and eyes. "What is that?" he'd asked. She glanced at him, surprised he'd noticed. "It's a dream I keep having," she said. Before he could ask more, the bus lurched forward, and everything he knew faded behind them. Back in the motel, Morgan leaned forward. "You said you were taken, that the bus never reached the campground. What happened instead?" Liam rubbed his hands over his face. "The engine died about 2 hours in. No signal, no map, just silence." He reached for the envelope on the nightstand and slid it across the table. Morgan opened it. Inside were hand-drawn maps, strange symbols and phrases scrawled in an erratic hand. "Cleansing. Only the willing remain. The woods do not forget." One drawing showed the bus surrounded by figures in gray robes, their arms outstretched. Another depicted a circle of masks hanging from tree branches. "You drew these?" Morgan's voice was low. Liam shook his head. "Sasha did, I just kept them." The motel phone rang at 6:48. Liam flinched violently. Morgan answered. A voice on the other end spoke a single, chilling command. "Tell him to stop talking." Then the line went dead. Morgan stared at the receiver, her pulse quickening, though her expression remained controlled. "I told you they're still out there," Liam said, his voice flat. Meanwhile, in the basement of the Willow Creek Public Library, tucked away beneath years of archived newspapers and forgotten microfilms, sat a leather-bound journal. There was no author name, no library tag. The dated entries were not from a student, but from someone older, Arthur Finch. He had documented every lead, every rumor, every theory about his son's disappearance. One page was bookmarked from June 11, 2006. "I think Liam's alive." A man saw someone matching his description near Missoula, said he was barefoot, rambling, eyes haunted, couldn't keep still. But by the time the police showed up, he was gone. Another entry read, "I don't think they crashed. I think they were taken, chosen. I think the woods hid them. Not by accident, by design." Liam had never known about the journal. He hadn't known how close his father had come to finding him, or how far gone his father already was. In his room that night, Liam opened the yearbook again. He found Sasha's message beside her photo. "Some things aren't meant to be drawn, but I saw them anyway." He touched the page, then turned to the very last one. Scrawled in shaky pen were the words, "We tried to leave. Only I made it. I'm sorry." He had no memory of writing it, but he knew the handwriting was his own. Outside the motel, headlights flared briefly, then vanished into the darkness. Someone was watching. Following Liam Thorne's mysterious return, a profound and unsettling silence fell over the small town of Willow Creek, Montana. The forest, however, refused to be quiet. A cold, relentless rain began to fall, a downpour so unseasonal and severe that locals whispered it was the woods weeping for the truth. The long-lost bus had been found, but it was clear that its secrets were still buried deep. On June 6, 2021, Sergeant Morgan Vance arrived at the excavation site. The area, once a quiet patch of trees, was now a hive of activity, with tarps stretched overhead, generators humming, and forensic tents scattered like stark white scars against the green. As she approached the lead technician, a short man with glasses fogged from the rain, he held up a clear evidence bag containing an old camcorder. The tape inside was loaded into a player, and a grainy video flickered to life. Dated June 5, 1999 at 4, 12 p.m., it captured the innocent laughter of students on the bus. Felix Vance joked with a bag of chips on his head, Rowan Hayes teased their teacher, and Sasha Kim sketched quietly, camera shy. The camera then turned to Liam Thorne, who looked into the lens but didn't smile. He turned the camera to the window, capturing the passing blur of pine trees and an overcast sky. Suddenly, the bus lurched violently. The camera jostled, students gasped, and someone shouted, "What was that?" The frame spun wildly, screams erupted, and a sharp metallic groan filled the air. The camera dropped sideways into the aisle, and then there was silence. The silence was broken by the sound of heavy, measured footsteps, too slow to be running, too steady to be panicked. Then a voice, faint and unfamiliar, began a low, chant-like recitation in a language no one recognized. The tape ended in static. Morgan watched it 5 times, a single question tormenting her. Who was walking down that aisle after the screaming stopped? Meanwhile, across town, Ilara Chen, Rowan's mother, tended to her garden. The roses, which Rowan had planted there last spring together, never grew properly after she vanished. Ilara wore the same scarf her daughter had once used as a belt, its edges frayed with time. Her fingers trembled as she watered each plant with a mechanical precision born of grief. She hadn't told anyone yet, but the night before, she had received a letter with no return address. Inside was a faded photo from 1999. It showed the students standing in a semicircle outside the bus in a clearing she didn't recognize. Most of them were smiling, but in the back, slightly out of frame, stood a figure in a gray robe. Ilara stared at the image for hours, a cold dread washing over her before she finally burned it. Even then, the smell of smoke seemed to cling to the room. At the Kalispell station, Liam sat in a windowless room, flanked by 2 officers. He was holding a small silver charm shaped like a pinecone, tarnished and bent at the tip. "It belonged to Sasha," he said quietly. "She dropped it the second night. I kept it for 22 years. He looked at one of the officers and added, "It reminded me of who we were before we forgot." When asked about the rituals he had mentioned, Liam described how they were forced to let go of their past lives. "They made us choose things to let go of," he said, his voice flat. "Names, memories, people. They said those ties made us weak, that we were becoming part of something older, something rooted." His gaze fell back to the charm. But Sasha never let go. She drew, even when they told her not to, even when they punished her. When asked what happened to her, Liam fell silent, his face a mask of pain. That night, Sergeant Morgan Vance drove to the home of Elias Finch, the retired Willow Creek High biology teacher. It was Elias who, back in 1999, had raised the alarm when the class never arrived at the campground. Now 71, hard of hearing and living alone, he opened the door slowly. His eyes widened when he saw Morgan. "You're back," he said, a note of grim recognition in his voice. "What do you mean the forest is remembering?" Morgan stepped inside. Elias' living room was a heartbreaking tribute to the missing students. Photos, newspaper clippings, and tapes were connected by red and blue yarn on a large corkboard. In the center, pinned above everything else, was a hand-drawn circular map. Scrawled in shaky pen were the words, "The Hollow Root." Elias explained that he had been researching old logging records and discovered a village that was not on any current map. It was used by loggers before the 1940s and named the Hollow Root after a massive cedar tree in the center that had rotted from the inside out. "They built cabins around it," Elias said. "But then something changed. People started disappearing. Reports of lights in the woods chanting. By 1948, the whole site was abandoned, erased from official maps." A chill crawled up Morgan's arms. "The government didn't want anyone going back," Elias concluded. "What if that's where they took the kids?" 2 days later at 3:11 a.m., the phone at the sheriff's department rang. A low, distorted voice on the other end said, "She's still drawing in the trees." Then, with a click, the line went dead. The next morning, a deputy found something carved into a tree near the old campsite, a symbol, an eye inside a circle surrounded by jagged branches. It was the same symbol Morgan had seen in the police files from Sasha's sketches. At the edge of town, Arthur Finch's old cabin, long abandoned after his death, had been broken into. Morgan arrived just after noon to find the back door splintered and footprints in the dust. In the fireplace, she discovered a shoebox containing burned photos, charred notebooks, and melted cassette tapes. At the very bottom, a single VHS tape lay in perfect condition, labeled "Last Night, Do Not Watch Alone." She placed it in an evidence bag, but as she did, her fingers tingled with an uneasy heat. Back at the station, Liam was in the interview room again, but this time he was not alone. Sitting beside him was Clara Boone, Felix's younger sister. She had been 13 when her brother vanished and was now 35, a nurse who had obsessively followed every update on the case. When she saw Liam, he froze. "You're Felix's sister," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her eyes unwavering. "You were the last one to see him," she said. "You owe me the truth." Liam's hands gripped the table tightly. "I tried to stop him," he said, his voice cracking with a mix of grief and guilt. "But he didn't listen." Clara leaned forward. "Stop him from what?" "Escaping," Liam replied. At that moment, a park ranger's radio crackled to life. "I found something," the voice said. "The coordinates matched the edge of the old village. I think you need to see this." Then, just like the camcorder tape, the radio went ecstatic. Sergeant Morgan Vance felt the silence of the forest more acutely than any sound. It had swallowed a park ranger whole, leaving behind nothing but a chilling final message. "I found something. You need to see this." After 3 days, there was no sign of the ranger's truck, his radio, or his body. The only thing they had was the echo of his last words, a stark reminder of the unknown that lay within the woods. Morgan stood in the makeshift command center, a tent pitched on the edge of the forest. Her eyes were fixed on a map dotted with red pins, creating a circle they had dubbed the Hollow Root Zone. This area was uncharted. No official trails existed there, and satellite images were mysteriously absent. Every drone they sent over met the same fate, its feed cutting out the moment it crossed the tree line, as if the forest itself was rejecting their intrusion. Her last hope was a man who had faced the same eerie void and survived. Liam Thorne. He was the only person who had ever walked out of the Hollow Root Zone alive, a survivor of a tragedy that had haunted this community for over 2 decades. Inside the tent, Morgan played a grainy camcorder tape from 1999, the year the rest of Liam's class vanished. She paused the footage at a specific moment, a fleeting glimpse of something unnerving. "What was that?" she asked, her voice low. Liam's gaze was steady, his eyes holding the weight of memory. "A ritual starting," he replied. He explained that the people in the robes were a group called the Rooted, who claimed to be older than the ancient trees themselves. "They said the forest chose us," Liam continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Said we weren't meant to leave because we'd been touched." To be touched, he explained, meant they had seen something forbidden, something the forest deemed off-limits to outsiders. Meanwhile, a second team used satellite triangulation to pinpoint the ranger's last known position. At the perimeter of the Hollow Root Zone, they found his radio, split in two, lying at the base of a tree. One side of the device was scorched black, as if hit by lightning, though there had been no storms. Carved into the tree's bark were the words, "We keep what the world forgot." Pinned beneath a rusted nail was a photograph of a young woman named Sasha Kim, her hands tied and her eyes wide with terror. A sinister mask was visible behind her. The photo was undated, but it looked recent, a shocking discovery that sent ripples through the state. The news spread like wildfire. A missing girl from 1999 might still be alive. This revelation ignited a fierce debate. Families who had buried their loved ones' remains were torn between hope and fury. Clara Boone, whose brother had been one of the missing students, appeared on television, clutching his old jersey. "My brother wanted to come home," she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "If there's even a chance someone's still out there, we can't stop now." But not everyone shared her sentiment. Another mother, Alara Chen, called the sheriff's office in tears. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "If Rowan isn't dead, that means she's been trapped for 22 years. That's worse." Back in the quiet town of Willow Creek, a ghost from Liam's past resurfaced. Jonah Croft, his childhood best friend, now a priest, appeared at his doorstep. Jonah had left town in 2004, unable to bear the grief that had consumed the community. He said he couldn't pray in a place that had lost its faith. Now he sat across from Liam, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. "I read your file," Jonah said. "They say you're traumatized, delusional." Liam let out a bitter laugh. "Am I?" Jonah's eyes were filled with a strange intensity. "You're the only one who came back. That means something." "It means I survived," Liam said simply. "No," Jonah countered, leaning forward. "It means you were sent back." Simultaneously, a new piece of evidence was unearthed. The VHS tape found in Arthur Finch's old fireplace was finally made playable by a team of technicians. The black and white footage, dated June 10, 1999, showed an old wooden cabin. Inside, a group of students sat in a circle, their eyes vacant, their movements stiff and unnatural. One girl, Rowan Hayes, stood and spoke in a chilling monotone. "We are no longer who we were. The forest has cleansed us. We accept the root." A robed figure placed a mask over her face and then turned to face the camera. The tape went blank. Morgan froze the frame, noticing a symbol tattooed on the figure's hand. It was the same symbol that appeared in Sasha Kim's drawings. She pulled out a folder Liam had given her weeks earlier. On page 3, she found a matching image with the caption, "He is the root speaker." Days later, a journal was found hidden beneath the floorboards of an abandoned ranger station. It belonged to Ms. Alois Greer, the chaperone on the 1999 trip, who had been presumed dead. Her final entry, dated June 12, 1999, painted a horrifying picture. "They call it the hollow root," she wrote, her shaky handwriting conveying her terror. "They feed it with memory, with names. Every day another child forgets who they are." She wrote that she had tried to help them but feared she was forgetting her own memories. The final, desperate line was a plea. "If you find this, tell my sister I didn't want this. They told me we were building something new. They lied." Morgan brought the journal to Liam. He read it, his hand trembling. "She tried," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "She tried to protect us." He explained that once you breathe the air and eat the food of the rooted, you start to lose yourself. "Not just your body," he said. "Yourself." Morgan leaned in, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "But you remembered." "I kept one thing," he said, pulling a small, silver pine cone from his pocket. "It was hollow. They made us burn everything from before, but I buried this." He explained that years later, when he found it, the familiar object had snapped something back into place. It had been his anchor to the person he used to be. Meanwhile, search teams made another horrifying discovery: a hidden root cellar 2 miles north of the bus site. Inside, they found empty beds, piles of ash, and chains bolted to the walls. One drawing, its edges burned, showed Sasha again, this time with her mouth sewn shut. The caption read, "Don't speak the old name." At 4:19 a.m., a forensic report landed on the sheriff's desk. Partial DNA recovered from a chain in the cellar matched a name in the National Registry. It was not a student, not a teacher, but someone who had never been connected to the case. Walter Boone, Clara's father, who had been missing since 1983. The lab had run the test 3 times, and the result was always the same. Deep within the earth, beneath the sprawling, tangled roots of the hollow root forest, lay a dark secret. On a rusted chain in a hidden chamber, a small smear of blood held the DNA of Walter Boone, a man who had vanished from Glacier National Park in 1983. Nearly 4 decades later, his genetic code was the missing piece in a cold case involving his own son. As Sergeant Morgan Vance stared at the forensic report, a chilling realization washed over her. This wasn't just a new lead in a missing persons case. She was looking at a legacy of loss that had started long before the disappearances of 1999. Meanwhile, across town, Walter's daughter, Clara Boone, sat in a cafe, the bitter taste of cold coffee mirroring the shock in her heart. She couldn't process what the sergeant had just told her. "My father," she whispered, as if speaking a foreign language. "He was involved in this." Sitting across from her, Liam's gaze was vacant. "I don't think he was involved," he said quietly. "I think he was the first victim." Back at the Hollow Root site, the FBI arrived, bringing with them a wave of skepticism. Agent Naomi Price, a tall, sharp-edged woman, took charge. To her, local legends and stories were irrelevant. The only things that mattered were facts. But the evidence she found defied all logic. First, there was an ancient cabin, seemingly untouched by time, covered in bizarre symbols unlike any known language. Inside, a locked trunk contained a trove of identification cards. Students from 1999, teachers, park rangers, and one from as far back as 1972. The third and most unsettling discovery was a preserved human brain floating in a jar labeled Memory Anchor, Subject 2. While reviewing the list of IDs, Morgan's eyes caught a name: Jonah Croft. There was no date, just a photo of a teenage boy with blank eyes. That evening, Morgan drove to a nearby church. She found Jonah sitting alone, surrounded by the soft glow of candlelight. "I need to ask you something," she said. Jonah didn't turn around. "You were on the trip, weren't you?" he responded, his voice flat. Morgan pressed him. "No, you lied. You said you were." Jonah finally turned. "I wasn't on that trip," he admitted. "But I've been there." When Morgan asked when, his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Before Liam, before the others, 1983. The ground seemed to shift beneath Morgan's feet. Jonah continued, "They don't just take kids, they take witnesses, people who see something they shouldn't." He confessed to seeing something and keeping it a secret until now. From his coat, he pulled out a weathered wooden mask painted with tree sap. "The Root speaker wore this," he said. "He told me I had a choice: become part of the forest or forget I ever came." When Morgan asked what he chose, he simply said, "I ran." Meanwhile, Liam, drawn by an unseen force, returned to the site. He walked along the perimeter, his fingers brushing against the rough bark of the trees. He stopped at a dead cedar and saw two initials carved into the wood: LT plus SK. He remembered the night he carved it, how Sasha had smiled at him, her first genuine smile since they arrived. It was before she was punished for drawing, before she stopped speaking, before she vanished. Suddenly the air went still. The trees rustled, but there was no wind. A voice, ethereal and hushed, called his name. He turned and saw her standing a short distance away, a woman thin and pale with long, tangled hair. Sasha Kim, alive. They stared at each other for an eternity. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. "I had to come," Liam whispered. "You'll bring them back. I never stopped carrying them." She led him deeper into the woods to a place unlisted on any map. A circle of stones with a single, split tree at its center, its trunk weeping a crimson sap. Sasha pointed to the base of the tree. "They're buried there," she told him. "The ones who tried to leave. Your friends, Rowan and Felix, the ones who remembered too much." Liam fell to his knees. "You were meant to stay," Sasha said, crouching beside him. "I didn't remember until the pine cone. They never took that from you." Just then, Morgan received a call. The forensic team had managed to clean up the faded VHS tape. A new frame had been recovered from the final second, a man holding the camera. It was not one of the students, not a teacher. It was a middle-aged man, tall and unmistakably Walter Boone, alive in 1999, filming the rituals. Back at the cabin, Sasha placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "You have to finish it." "Finish what?" he asked. "The root is dying," she explained. "That's why they sent the dreams and took your memories. They needed new soil, new seeds." Liam trembled. "What do I do?" She looked him in the eyes and said, "Burn it." Hours later, the FBI moved in. By then, Liam and Sasha were gone. The strange tree was gone, too, burned to ash. In its place, a hollow had formed, and in the center stood a single, upright silver pine cone. That night, a letter was slipped under Morgan's door. It had no return address. Inside was a photo of her, taken from behind, standing in the woods. The caption read, "You've seen too much." The fire blazed for hours, its orange glow painting the night sky like an open wound. Helicopters circled above, but no water was dropped, no effort was made to stop the flames. The fire was unnaturally contained within a perfect circle, the very heart of Hollow Root. All that remained was ash, bone, and the single silver pine cone, now split cleanly in two. From a distant ridge, Liam watched, his breath misting in the cold air. Sasha stood beside him, her face illuminated by the firelight. "They'll come looking for you," she said. "I know," he replied. "They'll ask where the others are. I'll tell them the truth, but not the whole truth." Sasha turned to him. "Will you tell them I'm alive?" Liam hesitated, then shook his head. She nodded once and without a sound stepped back into the darkness. He never saw her again. Back in Willow Creek, families gathered at the town hall. Agent Naomi stood at the podium, her face composed but weary. "The investigation into the class of 1999 remains open," she said. 17 are confirmed deceased, 10 are still unaccounted for. A possible cult presence has been ruled unsubstantiated. A storm of murmurs erupted from the crowd. "What about the drawings, the tapes? What about Sasha? Rowan?" Naomi only repeated that they were still analyzing the evidence. Liam knew the truth. They weren't analyzing anything, they were burying it. At the back of the room, Ilara Chen sat holding a framed photo of her daughter, Rowan, her knuckles white. The room fell silent as she stood. "I waited 22 years for an answer," she said, her voice trembling. "And I've made peace with not getting one." She looked at Liam. "I just hope wherever she is, whoever she became, that she forgives me for needing her to be the girl I remembered." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't need a funeral. I just want to believe she wasn't alone." Later that night, Liam stood in his father's cabin, dust clinging to the old beams. He found his father's journal, its pages marked with red tabs. He opened a fresh page and wrote, "I came back, but I left pieces of myself behind. Some things we carry, some things carry us. I don't know which I am anymore." He tore out the page, folded it, and placed it inside the yearbook. Then he walked into the woods for the last time. He returned the next morning, his clothes torn, his eyes hollow once more, but his shoulders no longer hunched in fear. They now carried a new weight. He handed the yearbook to Morgan. "It's all in there," he said. "The names, the places, the ones who gave in, the ones who resisted." "Will they believe it?" she asked. Liam shook his head. "They'll do what they always do, forget." At the library, Clara Boone sat on the floor, her fingers tracing the carved name of her brother Felix on the memorial wall. Beneath his photo, a dusty basketball trophy stood tall. Clara placed a letter beside it. Inside it read, "I forgive you and I'm proud of you." A week later, the forest was declared unstable. Roads were blocked and the trails were erased from public maps. Government officials cited erosion and wildfire damage, and no one questioned it. People wanted the memory gone, and maybe the forest did too. Months later, Morgan received an unmarked package in the mail. Inside was a sketchbook filled with Sasha's new drawings, softer, lighter, with trees that had no eyes and hands reaching for sunlight. In the back, a portrait of Morgan smiling with a note beneath it. "You remembered. That makes you dangerous. That also makes you free." On the final page, a single handwritten sentence. "They planted us thinking we'd break, but we were seeds." It was fall again in Willow Creek. Leaves turned a golden rust, and the faint sound of school bells echoed through the valley. Life had found a way to move forward, not because people had forgotten, but because forgetting was easier than remembering everything. The class of 1999 memorial still stood in the town square, its bronze plaque clean and quiet. 27 names were carved into it, but one, Rowan Hayes, was now rubbed smooth from too many fingers tracing the same line. A fresh silver pine cone rested beneath her plaque, unbroken. Morgan Vance no longer worked for the department. She had filed for early retirement 5 months after the investigation, and no one questioned why. She moved out of town, taking a job in a forgotten archive. But every June 5th, she returned to walk the old forest edge, leaving a single yellow flower near the boundary line. Liam Thorne was never seen again after that summer. No credit cards used, no phone activity, no sightings. Some say he left the country, while others believe he still lives in the woods, watching, recording, and remembering. Morgan received one last letter, again with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of a group of teenagers smiling in a clearing: Rowan, Felix, Sasha, and Liam. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "We were never meant to be forgotten, just planted elsewhere." In Willow Creek, the old librarian retired and passed on a key that opened a locked desk drawer. Inside, she had hidden something for decades: Sasha's original journal, the one everyone thought had been burned. The last page read, "The root will always find new soil, but now we've left the seeds in other hands." Taped beneath it was a copy of the VHS tape label with a simple instruction: "Play this only if they forget again." Sometimes hikers still report strange whispers near the tree line. Sometimes a symbol appears carved into bark overnight. Sometimes a pine cone is found, placed, not fallen. But the fire never returned. All that remains is ash and silence. Some things we carry, some things carry us, and some were never meant to come back.